At 7:03 in the morning, the kitchen is still dim, though the street outside has already started moving. A car passes somewhere beyond the window. The refrigerator hums. Water sits in the sink from earlier, catching a thin line of light that has not fully arrived yet. The nurse stands at the counter with the phone in one hand, its screen bright for a second too long. Then it is turned face down. That is all. Beside the sink, the work shoes wait on the floor, carrying the weight of hallways, rooms, quiet alarms, and one appointment that stayed in the body longer than expected. They do not explain anything. They only sit there, familiar and worn, saying very little. Maybe that is why they feel honest. Before the house asks for anything, one cup is rinsed and set in the rack. The room becomes less sharp. The cup is light in the hand, but the hand does not feel light. It still has the night in it. There is the faint smell of soap near the sink, the clean kind that never feels entirely clean after a long shift. There is a dish towel folded badly on the counter, one corner damp from someone using it before bed. There is a small brown ring where a mug sat too long. Nothing in the kitchen is out of place enough to be called a mess. It is only used. Lived in. Left half finished by people who were tired. The nurse stands there for a moment after setting the cup in the rack. No one calls from the hallway. No one asks where anything is. The phone stays face down on the counter, quiet now, its little rectangle of urgency hidden against the laminate. A few minutes ago, it held reminders, messages, the time, the appointment note, the unread things waiting their turn. Now it is only a dark shape beside the sink. That small turning over can feel larger than it looks. Not brave. Not dramatic. Just a hand deciding that the next sound does not need to enter yet. Outside, tires move over the street with that early morning softness, when the world is awake but not loud. Someone is leaving for work. Someone is coming back from somewhere. A truck passes slowly, and for a second the window trembles in its frame. Then the kitchen settles again. The work shoes are still by the counter. They are not placed neatly. One leans slightly against the other, the way tired things lean when no one is watching. The toes are scuffed. The soles hold the dull memory of hospital floors, parking lot pavement, elevator corners, a waiting room, maybe the hallway outside the appointment where the nurse stood not as the one with answers, but as the sibling who waited. That is a different kind of standing. At work, there are names to remember, rooms to enter, small needs that keep appearing. There is the practiced voice. There is the quick hand. There is the soft knock before opening a door. But after an appointment for someone you love, the body can feel less certain. The same hands are there. The same shoes. The same person. Still, the air around everything changes a little. The kitchen does not ask about that. It only gives the counter. The sink. The cup. The low hum of the refrigerator. The shoes on the floor, holding what cannot be placed anywhere else. Sometimes a familiar object is not sentimental. It is simply honest because it has been there for the whole thing. It has crossed the parking lot when the sky was still dark. It has stood under fluorescent light. It has paused beside a chair. It has waited while the face stayed calm because someone else needed calm nearby. And then it comes home. A pair of work shoes does not know how to tell a story. It does not say how long the shift felt after midnight. It does not say what was swallowed in the car before walking into the appointment. It does not say how many times the body kept moving because stopping would have made everything heavier. Maybe that is why looking at them can soften something. Not because they are beautiful. Because they are evidence. They sit there, ordinary and worn, and the room becomes a little less sharp around them. The nurse does not have to make meaning out of them. The shoes have already carried enough. The body has carried enough, too, though it may take the quiet kitchen to notice it. The water in the sink slows to a thin drip. One drop. Then another. The cup in the rack holds its small shine. The phone remains turned down. The street continues beyond the window with its buses, brakes, porch lights fading, people stepping into the morning with bags over their shoulders. Inside, the day has not fully arrived. There is only this narrow space before the house begins again. A few minutes when the nurse is not answering, not explaining, not becoming useful for anyone. The body stands there in socks, near the shoes that carried it through the night, and maybe respect arrives without a word. A quieter kind. The kind that notices the feet before asking them to move. The kitchen counter holds the small things that always seem to arrive before anyone is ready for them. A grocery receipt folded in half. A rubber band. The cap from a pen. A spoon left too close to the edge. A bottle of vitamins someone opened and did not put back in the cabinet. The ordinary clutter does not accuse anyone. It is only there, keeping record of a house that kept going while the nurse was gone. The shoes stay below it all. They are close enough to the sink that a drop of water could fall near one toe. Close enough to be noticed, but not enough to be in the way. In another hour, they may be moved. Someone may nudge them aside while making coffee. Someone may say nothing and step around them. For now, they remain. There is a tenderness in that, though it does not announce itself. A familiar object can become quiet company when the room is too tired for words. It does not ask for the full story. It does not need the nurse to name what happened at work, or in the waiting room, or in the short drive home afterward when the morning sky was the color of cooled metal. The shoes already know the weight. Not in a magical way. Not in a way that asks to be believed. Only because they were there. They were there when the body walked from the parking garage into the hospital, while the air still held the chill of night. They were there through the slow hours when the building seemed to breathe in beeps, wheels, elevator doors, and lowered voices. They were there when the nurse stood beside beds that were not family, and then later stood beside someone who was. That difference can stay in the knees. It can stay in the back of the neck. It can stay in the way a hand reaches for the phone and then stops before lifting it again. The body remembers more than the mind wants to sort through at 7:03 in the morning. So the phone stays face down. Its silence is not a grand silence. It is a kitchen silence. The kind that fits between the sink and the window, between one rinsed cup and whatever comes next. The kind that lasts only a few minutes but still feels like a small room inside the room. Outside, the street keeps moving. A neighbor's car door closes. Someone's trash bin rolls unevenly over the curb. Farther away, a bus exhales at the stop and pulls on. The world has no idea that the nurse is standing by the sink in socks, not quite finished with yesterday, not quite ready for today. That can be a lonely thing. But it can also be simple. The body has made it home. The shoes have made it home. The cup has been rinsed and set where clean things wait. The phone is turned away. For a few breaths, nothing more is required from the hands. Maybe the body does not need praise in a moment like this. Praise can feel too bright, too public, too much like something spoken from across a room. Respect is quieter. Respect might be noticing that the feet are sore before asking them to stand again. It might be letting the shoulders drop without making a story out of it. It might be looking at the shoes and understanding, in a plain way, that they carried more than rubber and leather. They carried a person through the places where care was needed. Care at work. Care in the family. Care that did not have time to become emotional because there were forms to read, doors to open, questions to answer, and the steady habit of staying useful. The nurse looks down. The shoes do not look like much. They look like shoes bought for long hours, chosen more for support than for beauty. Maybe the laces are pulled unevenly. Maybe the sides have softened where the feet press the same way every shift. Maybe one heel has worn down just enough to show how a body leans after many nights of continuing. There is no lesson in that. Only the quiet fact of it. A familiar object carries more than it says because most of what it carries was never spoken in the first place. The shoes held the walking. The kitchen holds the return. The phone, face down, holds the boundary of one small pause. And the nurse, standing there before sunrise, holds less tightly for a moment. The street outside keeps going. Inside, the room stays dim, and the shoes rest where the body finally stopped. A little more light begins to gather at the window, but the kitchen still belongs to the hour before things are expected. Not dark exactly. Just not awake. The counter has that early morning grayness where every object looks softer than it will later. The spoon near the edge. The quiet phone. The cup drying in the rack with one bead of water still caught along the rim. The sink has stopped dripping now, and somehow that small change makes the room feel even more still. The nurse does not move right away. There is a kind of quiet that comes only after many sounds have passed through a person. Hospital doors opening and closing. Wheels over polished floors. A monitor somewhere making its steady note. A voice from a desk. A family member asking a question carefully. The low murmur of people trying to be calm in a place where calm takes effort. Then the appointment. Then the drive. Then this kitchen. The body arrives in one place, but the sounds take longer. They loosen slowly. They leave by themselves. The nurse stands near the sink, not because there is more to do, but because standing there is easier than choosing the next thing. The work shoes wait on the floor with the patience of objects. Their shape is familiar. Their weight is familiar. Even the way they have settled against the base cabinet seems familiar, as if they know this small stopping place. A pair of shoes can become part of a room without anyone noticing. They wait by doors. They collect dust near mats. They are kicked off after long days and slid on before anyone has fully become ready. They do not look important while life is happening. They only become visible later, when the room is quiet enough to see what has been carrying the ordinary distance between one responsibility and the next. That morning, they are more than shoes. Still, nothing about them changes. The laces remain uneven. One tongue sits lower than the other. A pale line of dried salt or street dust marks the side near the sole. They look plain in the dimness, almost dull, and maybe that is what allows them to tell the truth without making the truth louder. They have been under the body all night. They have carried the nurse through rooms where other people's needs came first. They have stood in elevators beside strangers who were too tired to speak. They have crossed the parking lot after the appointment, when being a sibling felt different from being a nurse, even though the same body was doing the walking. There are roles that fit over a person like a coat. And there are moments when the coat feels thin. In the appointment room, the nurse may have known the words, may have understood the timing, the form, the question behind the question. But sitting beside someone loved can make knowledge feel quieter. The professional voice may still be there, steady and kind, but the sibling inside it is listening differently. The shoes were there for that, too. Under the chair. Beside the paper-covered exam table. On the floor while the nurse nodded and kept a face gentle enough for someone else to lean on. Now they rest in the kitchen, where no one is asking them to carry anything. Not yet. The day will come for them later. Or another pair. Another shift. Another hallway. But for this small stretch of morning, they are allowed to be only objects on the floor. The nurse is allowed to be only a body near the sink. The phone remains turned down. Its silence has become part of the counter, part of the cup, part of the pale window and the fading street noise. Somewhere outside, a car slows, then continues. Somewhere inside the house, a pipe settles in the wall. Nothing needs to be named. That may be the gentlest part. There is no need to call the night hard. No need to call the morning tender. No need to take the shoes and make them into anything more than what they are. Their meaning rests there because the body recognizes it before language can reach for it. The body knows the floor. The body knows the weight. The body knows the difference between walking because there is work to do and walking because someone you love is beside you. A softer respect can begin there, without ceremony. Not as praise. Not as a speech. Only as the quiet recognition that these feet kept going, these hands kept steady, this breath kept returning under fluorescent lights, under morning clouds, under the small pressure of being needed. The nurse looks once more at the shoes. Then the room lets them be. The house begins to make its small morning sounds. Not fully awake yet. Only stirring. A floorboard gives a short, dry sound somewhere beyond the kitchen. The heat moves through the vent with a low breath. From another room comes the faint shift of fabric, maybe someone turning over, maybe the house settling around sleep that has not quite ended. The nurse listens without meaning to listen. After nights spent hearing every call light, every footstep, every change in someone's breathing, quiet does not arrive all at once. It takes time for the body to believe it. Even in the kitchen, with the phone turned over and the cup in the rack, some part of the nurse still waits for the next sound to mean something. The shoes wait too. They are close to the cabinet, angled toward the room as if they stopped mid-thought. Their soles are heavier than they look. They have carried hallways, parking lots, the polished floor of the clinic, the short walk from a chair to a check-in desk, the moment afterward when the nurse and the sibling were not two separate people anymore. Sometimes that is the tiring part. Not the walking alone. The changing. To move from one kind of care into another without enough space between them. To answer questions with the calm voice at work, then sit in the passenger seat of someone's worry and still sound steady. To know what certain words mean and still feel them land differently when they belong to someone at your own table, your own history, your own phone contacts. The kitchen does not separate any of this. It lets everything stand together. The counter with its faint crumbs. The sink with one rinsed cup. The phone face down like a closed door. The work shoes on the floor, holding the shape of feet that have not had time to be only tired. The nurse rests both hands on the edge of the counter. The laminate is cool. That coolness is simple enough to stay with for a second. No chart. No conversation. No appointment time. No need to decide what kind of face to have. Just the counter beneath the hands and the soft pressure of standing. Respect can be very quiet when it first appears. It may not come with kind words. It may not even feel like kindness. It may only be the absence of pushing. The body is there, and for once, no one is asking it to move faster. The feet are out of the shoes. The shoulders are not squared for a hallway. The hands are not reaching for anyone. They are only resting. Outside, the street keeps doing what streets do. A car rolls past with music low enough to be only a pulse. A delivery truck slows near the curb, then moves on. The first thin daylight touches the window and makes the kitchen look almost ordinary again. Almost. Because some mornings carry a night inside them. They carry the fluorescent light that stayed in the eyes. They carry the appointment room, the paper on the exam table, the careful smile given to a sibling so the room would not feel more frightened than it already was. They carry the drive home when the hand stayed on the wheel or folded in the lap, and nothing said out loud matched the full weight of what was felt. The shoes carried that morning into the kitchen. Not loudly. Only by being there. A familiar object can hold a person's silence without asking to open it. It can sit near the sink and keep its shape. It can be scuffed, practical, a little worn down at the heel, and still seem to understand the plain truth of having gone where the body was needed. The nurse looks at them and does not have to soften all at once. That matters. Some tenderness arrives too quickly and feels like pressure. But this is not that. This is slower. It comes through the floor, through the quiet phone, through the small relief of the cup drying in the rack. It comes through seeing the shoes emptied of feet, no longer moving, no longer carrying anyone through a door. For a few minutes, even the shoes are allowed to stop. The nurse breathes. The room stays dim enough to be gentle. Somewhere down the hall, sleep continues. Somewhere outside, the morning keeps passing by, carrying people toward shifts, schools, errands, appointments, unfinished lists. The world has already begun its asking. But here, beside the sink, the asking has not reached all the way in. The body stands there in its own small quiet. Not fixed. Not refreshed. Only present. And under that presence, almost hidden, there is a softer respect for what kept going when no one had time to notice. The morning keeps brightening, but slowly, as if it does not want to disturb the room. The window above the sink begins to show the street more clearly. A parked car. A pale strip of sidewalk. The shape of a neighbor's trash bin near the curb. Nothing special. Nothing arranged to be meaningful. Just the ordinary world continuing in its quiet, stubborn way. Inside, the kitchen remains half lit. The nurse has not picked up the phone. That may be the whole pause. Not a long rest. Not sleep. Not the kind of silence that changes a life. Only the phone lying face down beside the sink, keeping its messages turned toward the counter for a few more breaths. Only the cup drying in the rack. Only the shoes resting on the floor, emptied of feet, still holding the shape of the night. A familiar object can make a room feel less alone. Not because it speaks. Because it stays. Those shoes have stayed through too many ordinary crossings to count. The walk from the parking lot into the hospital before the sun was up. The turn into a patient room. The step backward to make space for a stretcher. The slow movement beside a sibling after the appointment, when the nurse knew how to listen but could not make the moment smaller. They have been present for the parts no one would think to ask about. The little pause before opening a door. The careful breath before saying something steady. The moment in the car when the body sat still, but the mind kept walking down one hallway after another. Now the shoes are simply here. Near the sink. Near the cup. Near the body that is trying to arrive all the way home. The nurse looks at them without needing to decide anything. The laces are loose. One shoe has turned slightly outward, as if it gave up on standing straight. There is something almost tender about that, though tender may be too large a word for an object on a kitchen floor. Still, the room knows. The body knows, too. It knows in the soles of the feet, now touching the cool floor. It knows in the lower back, in the wrists that held the cup, in the eyes that have looked at too much bright light. It knows in the small relief of not lifting the phone again. Sometimes respect begins as noticing. Noticing that the body did not disappear under the weight of being needed. Noticing that the hands kept their gentleness. Noticing that the feet kept finding the floor, even when the heart was somewhere else. There is no applause in the kitchen. There does not need to be. The refrigerator hums with its plain, steady sound. A pipe gives one soft knock in the wall. Down the hall, the rest of the house holds its sleep a little longer. The nurse stands in the dimness as the first real morning light reaches the counter and touches the phone, the cup, the edge of the sink. Then the shoes. For a moment, they look almost new in the light. Not clean. Not untouched. Just seen. Maybe that is enough for this hour. To see what carried you without making it carry more. To let the shoes rest. To let the phone stay down. To let the body stand there without turning itself back into a task too quickly. The street outside continues to move. People pass by without knowing. A car slows at the corner. A bus sighs at a stop. Somewhere, someone is starting coffee. Somewhere, someone is already late. The whole morning gathers itself, piece by piece, and still this kitchen keeps one small pocket of quiet. The nurse breathes inside it. No one has to call it gratitude. It is too early for big words. But there is something like thanks in the way the eyes lower toward the shoes. Something like thanks in the way the hands stay open on the counter. Something like thanks in the quiet permission for the body to be tired without being turned away. The familiar object carries more than it says. And for once, it does not have to say anything. The shoes rest beside the sink. The phone remains face down. The cup dries in the rack. The room becomes soft enough to hold the morning without sharpening it. The nurse stands there a little longer. The light reaches the floor slowly. It touches the edge of one shoe, then the other, without asking them to become anything more than they are. The phone is still face down. The cup is nearly dry. Somewhere outside, another car passes, and the sound comes through the window softened by the morning. The nurse does not move yet. There is a quiet mercy in not moving. In letting the body know it has arrived. In letting the feet feel the floor without the shoes around them, without the hallway ahead, without the next door opening. The house will wake soon. Someone may need coffee, a ride, an answer, a clean shirt, a calm voice. The day will find its way in. But for now, the shoes rest beside the sink. And the body that kept going is finally allowed to be here.